Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite video games. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
Pumpkins.
Pumpkins. It is pumpkin season. It is true. Maybe I'll order a pumpkin latte today. But that's not what you're here for. You're not here to hear about pumpkins or lattes. Or maybe it is.
Exactly what I'm here for.
Okay, so we're just going to go to Pumpkin Watch now?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, the lore of pumpkins is fascinating. First discovered in the Americas during the period of invasion from Europe, the pumpkin is a magnificent gourd. And I'm not doing this. Go ahead.
All right, but we are going to be answering more of your questions today from you in our community. If you do have questions for this or either of our other podcasts, be sure to send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. You can also go ahead and shoot those to us on Discord, where a lot of these actually came from. We do have a channel set aside for our Patreon supporters as a way of saying thank you and giving them sort of first billing if they have questions that they want answered. But those of you that can't support us on Patreon, we understand, times being what they are and all. But we do have one for our Q questions, which we do also look at for questions for the podcast. Just specify which podcast it is for, please. This way Matt and I don't have to argue or fight, even though I did steal one from the regular show for this one. So our first question comes from Bierhammer, a dwarf shaman of Moonguard. Question for Lore Watch. Some of my favorite moments in WoW are when I come across a diverse group of mobs, such as the Venture Co. and Bloodsail Buccaneers. It's curious to see such diverse alliances consisting of a wide array of cultures and backgrounds. It is interesting to learn about the genesis of each faction as to why unsuspected NPCs decide to form an alliance to pursue particular means. In the future, what are some new factions or groups that could potentially be formed in the future based on the events that occurred in recent history of Warcraft? And could they have a role in that vacation expansion you two are yearning for? And I hope for this too. That's it's a good question because WoW, groups like that are the impetus behind like the third faction movement that a lot of people have been asking for a very, very, very long time, almost as long as the game has been around. They do operate sort of in between, where you'll see dwarves and trolls working together, or gnomes and tauren, or whatever the case is. There's the potential for those that don't operate within the necessary confines of whatever horde or alliance structure there is to kind of pave their own way. They're not part of sort of that military structure or that societal structure, and they just kind of do their own independent thing. I think Battle for Azeroth probably has, and maybe even Legion, has the most potential to really give us a little bit more of that, but how that would look, I don't necessarily know yet. Matt, do you have any ideas?
Well, I think that about 7,500 years ago, pumpkins were first cultivated in North America. So, now, honestly, I don't really even feel like we need to do anything as strong as have like a third faction.
Sure.
We could just let people group with whoever. Like, I honestly thought that the end of Battle for Azeroth kind of put us in a good place to finally just say, okay, the status quo is both sides are looking at the other and going, because, not a lot of friendship going on there. The Horde has spent a lot of time making absolutely sure the Alliance knows that they think they're dogs. So there's you don't get to burn a major capital of the other faction and then, oh, sorry, our bad, let's be friends.
Sure, yeah.
It's not like an accident, but you could have it basically be where both factions are like avoiding each other, or what they call a Cold War, and you could have groups just forming like that are like, what, we opt out of this. Where this come get back to me when you're not crazy, and just form their own loose assortments. The weird thing about World of Warcraft is since it comes from the RTS, it very much tries to maintain that RTS feeling to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it also lifts a ton from D&D.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And in D&D, you easily could have groups like, I'm a red wizard from Thay. I'm a good person from a good place. Why are we on the same squad again? We have common goals. What are those goals? Looting things. Okay, yeah, I do like looting things. So I always wonder, like, we go to these dungeons and stuff. Couldn't we just be going to dungeons to get loot the way people always have been going to dungeons to get loot? And you could have a Tauren and a dwarf who maybe they don't get along on anything else, but they're united in their love of taking stuff from other people. When did burglary wasn't good enough anymore, and it had to have factional hate brought into it? I feel like adventuring could be its own reward, and it doesn't need to be about these two antagonistic political groups jockeying for position, and you once again being forced to be the sharp tip of the really poorly aimed spear. It's like when we went to Pandaria, and it was like, wow, we really messed this place up. If only we'd listened to them as they repeatedly told us not to do this, huh? Oh well. Anyway,
it's also fascinating too, because I'm looking at some of the history, and one of the biggest factions, I think, that sort of spun off from sort of that idea of everybody's kind of bad. You had the Defias, right? It wasn't just humans. They had Worgen, they had Murlocs, they had creatures and beings that necessarily.
Yeah, but they were very anti-Stormwind, though.
They were very anti-Stormwind, yes. But I'm just saying, that was probably the first, I think, introduction to that idea. But I also really like the idea of the normal citizen, right? And we always sort of focus on these factions made up of these adventurers or these super important people, when in truth, things like, Explorers League or whatever other groups are out there, they're not necessarily really adventurers. They're just normal people. So they could be coalitions of farmers or coalitions of groups that just live next to each other, because that's the other thing too. There are border towns. There are lands that butt up against each other that have opposing factions. And if you're a farmer and you're just trying to eke out a living, do you really want to fight with your neighbor all of that time? If you're on the other side and there's an orc pig farmer and you're just trying to grow pumpkins, because there's a lot of those in Westfall for some reason, I don't know.
They were imported from South America around.
It all comes back to pumpkins. But do you really want to fight with them? Do you really have the time, the energy to survive if you get into an engagement with it? Is it better to just have an understanding or a mutual, I'm not going to mess with your stuff, you don't mess with my stuff, we're good? Or maybe, rabid Worgen come in and they start ravaging the pigs and they start ravaging the farmlands that the human farmer is, and they have to band together. I like those type of alliances because they're based off of not some political structure or some grand oh, the world is ending threat. It's no, this is just daily survival. And I think Battle for Azeroth kind of opened up a lot of that, really, because a lot of what you deal with, even though we're the champion and we're dealing with or speaker or whatever the heck title you had, and doing those big important things, a lot of it is, a lot of the questing, at least from what I saw, was dealing with normal people out in the world and them getting into weird situations or bad situations, especially I think the Alliance had more of that in Battle for Azeroth, but I could absolutely see the average person being what the big wigs are doing isn't working for us. We need to just survive. I'm going to be over here now. That guy over there, yeah, he looks different than me. Maybe his skin's falling off, whatever. He ain't bothering me right now. We're good. And I could see maybe more folks sort of breaking away from that. I like the idea of regular folks not wanting to get involved in that and just trying to live a life. And that's what sort of makes these groups up. I would like to see more of that, I think. What about you?
No, nothing but conflict. I want to see farmers stabbing each other. No, you reminded me of when you go into, oh, bloody heck. It's in Battle for Azeroth. It's Stormsong Valley. When you go to Stormsong Valley and you get to that first town, and then they're like, hey, over the bridge, just go over there and talk to so-and-so. And you're just like, okay, so you start walking across the bridge, and then a cutscene happens, and you're like, oh, God, no. It's never good when a cutscene happens while you're walking over a bridge. And, the Horde just starts firebombing the place. And you get in there, and there's farmers stuck to walls with their own pitchforks. And I'm sitting there going, why? What does the Horde get out of this? This town is in the middle of freaking nowhere. It does nothing. That's the kind of thing I don't want to see anymore. I feel like it's if we're going to have faction conflict, could the faction conflict at least make sense?
Yeah, stop slaughtering innocents, because that just doesn't make any sense anymore.
It's not even that it doesn't make sense. It's this is not a strategic place. It's just a farm town in the middle of nowhere. It's It's not important to Cultiris even, which isn't even in the Alliance yet. You managed to successfully make Cultiris want to be in the Alliance. Good job, if that's what you were going for. So I think it would be nice to see like just farmers, like, you know, one guy's growing pumpkins and he's got some sheep, and the other side there's an orc trying to get a pig to eat a cactus, and the humans eventually, pardon me, fella. Yeah, what you want? I couldn't help but notice you're trying to feed a cactus to your pig there. Yeah, what about it? Nobody likes to eat cactus.
That is not true, sir. Cactus is a delicacy.
What are you getting at? It's got spikes all over it. You gotta, like, if you cut it open inside, the flesh is full of water. That's great, but you're just handing them big old chunks of spikes and expecting them to eat them. It'll make them strong. No, it'll shred his insides. Let me show you some pumpkin. And like 20 minutes later, they're sitting on a stoop somewhere. The pig's eating a bunch of pumpkins, and he goes, "Where me get more of these pumpkins?" Well, you know, I've raised them, but I do need to sell some of them. I'll pay you in meat. Well, I haven't had meat in a while. It's true. When the Defias fellas came through, they kind of rounded up all the animals. Yeah, all right, I can make that work. And then, you know, 10 years later, that's how we built a thriving town here. Isn't that right, Grogthlar? I guess. Yeah, I wasn't really listening to you. You talk a lot. But just, you know what I mean? Like, let's just like stop. It's yeah, we have enough things to fight.
I kind of feel like that's more close to the reality of like what life would really be like, right?
Well, I don't really care if it's reality at this point. I just don't want to have any more, you know, walking into a barn and seeing a guy impaled on his own pitchfork because the Horde and Alliance have decided to get uppity again. I am tired of that story. I would like to see other stuff.
And we understand that that's sort of the core, like that is a core history of the game. And I don't want people to think that we're just, you know.
Oh, you know what? You know what?
But
I will actually. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna pull the trigger on it.
Go ahead.
I don't care that it's a core story. We've done it. We have done it into the ground. Every time someone suggests that maybe we could change it up, do something different, some old guard person would come out of the woodwork with, this is, you know, the war between the orcs and the humans is the core part of World of Warcraft. And I'm like, you guys got tired of it.
It stopped being about orcs and humans a long time ago.
You ended it in Warcraft 3. You ended it. It was ended. Then when you decided you want to do World of Warcraft, you were afraid it wouldn't work without the conflict. So yes, you could have put everybody into one faction. You could have had everybody trying to figure out how to get along. And you chose not to, thinking that that's what made Warcraft what it was. And we've had 16 years of it. And I don't hate World of Warcraft, and I don't even hate the faction conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's time to do something else. And they're trying to do something else. Shadowlands is a big step forward in that they've took the story someplace nobody was expecting, and it's full of weird stuff that nobody knows what to do with. That's cool. Maybe not all of it is. I think most of the gameplay stuff's pretty solid. A little bit of it might not be and needs to be adjusted, but the story is actually it's branching out. It's getting into other things. We're going places where nobody gives a rat's behind about the Horde and Alliance.
And I think that's refreshing, right? And that's you're hitting the point
exactly.
that you're hitting the point that I was exactly getting to. It's not that we.
I'm just doing it angrily because I want to do it angrily for once. I'm tired of always pretending that we like everything. I mean, and you and I have different tastes. We have different things we like and dislike. You feel one way, I feel another way. But on this particular topic, I feel like I have tried for years now to be calm and rational and methodical about it and just explain my reasoning, and it doesn't seem to take. And finally, I'm just going to say it like this and let people feel how they want about it. It's time to not just take a step back from it, forget it.
For me, it's an opportunity to move forward and sort of evolve the game, right? Like, and that's the way I look at it. And you're absolutely right. And that is, I 100% support you in how you present it. But like, the way that I look at it is this. We've shown that the faction divide doesn't need to be front and central. We've shown it before. Legion got put aside. Battle for Azeroth, it eventually got put aside because that didn't fit it. And even now, like you point out, there's nothing of the faction divide, really. Even the stuff with Tyrande, love it or hate it, like even she's starting to like find a middle ground, and that's a hot issue that we can always go into later, but like she's starting to figure out that maybe things aren't as black and white as everything we thought it was. And I'm here for that. I'm here for that evolution of story, and I want to see it continue to happen. And if we see other, coalitions of folks that feel the same way in game, I would be very, very happy about that. But
let me put another thing. This is another thing I want to put into this, because I know you're trying to wrap it up. So I have to stop you by making it more complicated, because that's just me. But going back to, do you remember Aaron Alston?
Vaguely.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of RPG stuff back in the 80s and 90s. He died fairly recently. Very, very prolific author. He wrote a lot of the original Dungeons & Dragons Gazetteers for the known world setting.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay.
Did a bunch of Star Wars stuff, too. The guy wrote a ton. Wrote a bunch of Champions books. One of the things he did in one of his Gazetteers, he wrote the Theatis and Alphatia book. And they were two empires. They were inimical towards each other, constantly engaged in a whole series of hot and cold wars. But one time they discovered, independently, they each discovered a plane of like an elemental airplane with all these tumbling rocks in it and weird life in there. And each realized that the other was going to try and explore it first. And rather than fight over it, they actually, reason actually prevailed, and they cooperated, and they built a fleet together to go in, because like they were like, you've got the ships that can fly in the elemental void, but we've got all the trained Griffin riders. And they were like, yeah, that's true. That's a good point. And they actually worked together. I would love to see the Horde Alliance do that once, not necessarily out of like any trying of peaceful overture, not trying to be buddies, just realizing, okay, it makes more sense if we work together here.
Mm-hmm.
Each of us will get something we want, and it'll defend the planet from invasion. And it's like we get tantalizing glimpses of it from time to time, like the Broken Shore bit.
Yeah.
Up at the intro to Legion actually could have worked. And I want the story to go along the lines of pragmatism for a little while and give us something else. I'm just very tired of this conflict, because it doesn't go anywhere. It didn't go anywhere for so long that getting to the point where Saurfang dies for what he did in the, when he was a servant of the Legion, for what he did when he was like one of the ones who drank the blood like Grom Hellscream. That's what you see at the end of Battle for Azeroth, is like the old Horde realizing what it did and laying down its life to try and prevent it from ever happening again. You know what I mean? Narratively, that's what you got. That's what that moment was. So it's time for that moment to matter. It's time for like the Horde's trying a new thing with a new government. It's the Alliance is like, okay, we've been burned by this before. We've trusted you and we've been burned, but we're going to try again. And let that happen. It doesn't have to change the world immediately. It doesn't have to make it a peaceful place. There's tons of stuff that still wants to kill everything. We can't go in expansion without tripping upon a new cult that wants everything to die. But I think it's time for the Horde Alliance to just finally realize it doesn't benefit either one of them. They will always end up fighting until like some weird stalemate.
Yeah, and like there needs to stop being like hiccups in it too. Like with the sword in the middle of Azeroth, the factions trying to come together to heal the planet because they live on the planet. This is where all my stuff is. I don't want it to go and kaboom. There needs to be a little bit more of that and a little less derailment. There's always going to be folks and NPCs or characters that will try to take advantage of that, and that's fine. And figuring out how you deal with that can be part of the story, but it doesn't necessarily have to be one faction versus another. It could be, wow, that guy over there is a real big jerk, and he's trying to stop us from healing the planet. Maybe we should go beat him with a rock. Well, I got a stick. Sweet. Well, I can put the stick on the rock. Oh, yeah, there we go. And like going forth and working.
That no ingenuity I've heard so much about.
But I mean, they could do stuff like that. And I would love to see more of that, honestly. I really, really honestly would.
And for that matter, and I know we've been talking about this for a while, but it would also doesn't have to have the factions involved in it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've talked about groups like the Defias or the Cenarian Circle or whatever. It doesn't even have to be a group or a faction. It could literally just be a bunch of people met and decided to hang out.
Yeah.
Like imagine we come upon a town and it's a town with like, an orc sheriff and a gnome mayor, and there's some elves and of different kinds. Like there's actually a night elf and a blood elf hanging out, talking about stuff.
They're planning their poker night, nothing major.
Yeah, and they don't care. Maybe because it's like in Outland or it's on some continent no one's ever heard of if we're exploring like new places of Azeroth. Just there's places where people went and, because you got to tell me that between the last invasion of the Legion, the one before that, this whole death thing, the Scourge rampaging around, people haven't gotten on boats and tried to get the F away. We know people have done that. We've seen people do that.
Yeah.
So there's got to be places where there's just a bunch of people who got on a boat and sailed and
because
found
they're just
an
tired
island.
of everything.
Yeah, or we're like, oh God, everyone's dying. Let's go. You know what I mean? Just, I feel like there must be out of the way places where you could stumble upon these groups of people who just don't care.
Yeah, and it could be a really cool thing, or maybe it happens in Pandaria because we're no longer there fighting. Maybe folks went there after everything was like we ruined everything and decided to help clean stuff up, and then decided to stay. You could do some really cool and interesting things that sort of represent this and kind of harken back to everything that we've done as players and people in the game world, right? It doesn't have to, and that's the other argument that I hear a lot, is a lot of people try to die on this hill of, but if we do this, it erases everything we've ever done. And no, it really doesn't. It is a culmination and response to everything that has happened already. And I mean, put yourself in the average citizen's shoes. You've lived through Old God invasions, Silithid invasions, countless wars, the world attempting to blow itself up because Deathwing decided he was going to crash through it and break the pillar that held up everything. You lived through elemental, tragedy. If you're human, you've lived through the Defias Brotherhood coming through and trying to exact their revenge and taking everything you own because they need supplies, or trying to press you into service because press gangs were a thing. Do you want to be around that? Would you not have just found a way out if you could? And there has to be people that was a thing. And so if we could stumble upon those people that have decided to make a new life somewhere else, away from all of this, away from the world-ending tragedy, or away from even the local tragedy. How many corrupted towns, mayors, officials, people in power have we experienced throughout the years in both factions? You're in a town and there's that priest. Well, he's looking a little shady today. I think I saw him talking to a shadow. I don't want to live in this town anymore. Stuff like that happens. It has happened. It's been happening for ages. Come on. You can't tell me that Elves who didn't like Azshara didn't go and travel somewhere else to settle. We know they did. You can't tell me that you can't find random Tauren throughout the world, because we know that they roamed. That was their whole thing. They moved from where they were proto-Tauren. You have an opportunity to have some really cool, diverse cultures introduced back into the game that isn't necessarily race specific. And I think that's a really cool idea, because a lot of times we sort of tie in race with culture. And we've talked about this on the show in the past. And there is a certain element of that, but there's larger communities that develop their own culture based off of where they are, the cities, the towns, the peoples that live and settle around there, and that defines it more than anything else. But I think we've spent a good 20 some odd minutes on this. I think we're going to move on. Thank you very much for the question, Beerhammer. I'm sure we didn't answer it at all, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless.
I think we kind of answered it.
Kind of, maybe.
And hell, we told them about pumpkins.
We did. Pumpkins played into it. It's true. Speaking of pumpkins, our next one comes from Reactor, a Forsaken hunter on Spirestone. The original Forsaken are comprised of the human citizens of Lordaeron. With all the uses of the Plague, Blight, Valkyr, or what have you thought you have throughout the lore, how come we haven't seen other races afflicted or risen from it? Aside from the Elves that became Dark Rangers, I think an undead Tauren or Dwarf would be awesome. Do you think Blizz will ever have the Dark Ranger as an advanced class, like the Death Knights or Demon Hunters? What would be the Alliance equivalent? Thank you and keep up the great work. Apparently they listened to the podcast on the way to work, and even started listening to older shows. And apparently thinks we are accurate in our predictions. Hey, a broken clock is right twice a day. Just going to throw it out there.
And a broken clock that screams, the Naru! But how often is that right? The clock just yells Naru all the time. They're evil! They're evil!
Why is that other one just screaming Argus?
Get in, losers. We're going to Argus. Get in, losers. We're going to Argus. This clock is terrible. It does not tell time.
Best Photoshop I ever did.
Tor, there's a high mountain named, I can't remember his first name, but there's an undead Tauren who, before he was a Death Knight, was undead, and then he became a Death Knight.
Yep. One of the first four horsemen was a dwarf.
Yeah, that's true too. There have been others. It is relatively. The thing is that the reason that the Scourge is mostly humans is just because it's been used in areas that are mostly human.
Yeah.
It was dropped on Lordaeron. That's where most of the people who got scourged were originally, and then the ones that got used up north tended to hit places where there were human settlements. Quite frankly, I want to know. Like, there were a lot of Vrykul up there. Obviously, they went into suspended animation for a long time. Were there humans who left the Eastern Kingdoms and went and settled in Lordaeron? I mean, not in Lordaeron. We know they were living there.
Northrend.
In Northrend? Like, because there's farmers and stuff in the Grizzly Hills, and there's clearly human settlements in the Howling Fjord. Borean Tundra, not so much. But there looks to be quite a few places where they were humans. Were those just descendants of the Vrykul who didn't go south? Or were they, like, settlers who moved back up north from the Eastern Kingdoms? And we know that there were, like, the Drust in Kultiris who were clearly Vrykul descended. We know there were Vrykul, the humans in the Eastern Kingdoms were Vrykul descended. They were effectively brought by some Vrykul alongside Tyr and Arcadis and Ironia. So all of this has me wondering, like the Scourge seems to just have hit humans more. They used human magicians to spread it. Kel'Thuzad, for instance, they struck up cults among humans who tend to be cultier than dwarves. Not a lot of dwarves in cults. I'm not sure why. Maybe because being a dwarf here.
Maybe because the last cult that they had that the dwarves were in brought Ragnaros to the middle of their mountain, because that worked out real well for them.
That's Dark Iron, true. It might be the other reason why they're not as culty, because all the cults are over in the Dark Irons. But yeah, I think it's just generally a case of the Scourge mostly hit places where there were humans. And then, I mean, you would expect to see more High Elf / Blood Elf, because the Scourge did march its way straight up through Silvermoon. Like, there's a giant death line that goes right through the whole place, right towards the Isle of Quel'Thalas. And then they literally just walked on the bottom of the ocean till they then walked back up on the Isle of Quel'Thalas. So I feel like there should be a lot of humans, a fair chunk of elves, some dwarves, but not that many of other races, just because they weren't the ones who were right there when it first got used.
Interestingly enough, though, like, going back to Icecrown, we see some of this. Like, look at the Bloodwing. A lot of those undead, a lot of those they're not forsaken, quote unquote, they're not free-willed, but they are undead, and they are blood elves. They're elves. Like, look at Blood Queen Lanethel. Look at the three orb sharing vampire blood elves that we encounter, whether it's through dungeons or in the raid itself, and all those little individual packs are liches with blood elves.
Yeah, but you know what you just made me think of?
What's that?
The Scourge is very clearly modeled on Maldraxxus.
It is.
The Venthyr are clearly the inspiration for the vampiric blood elves.
It's true.
So is there going to eventually be, like, undead druids because they're modeled after Ardenweald?
I mean, why not? Well, technically that already exists, right? Because
is that what we call the Drust druids? Is that what we think their connection is? Well, that leaves one left, and that's the Valkyr are based on the Valkyr are based on the Bastion. So each of these, so each of these groups, like each of these undead groups, has a kind of inspiration in the Shadowlands. That just occurred to me. They've all kind of bled through.
Yeah, and if you look at let's go to Maldraxxus real quick, because as you point out, Maldraxxus seems to be like the blueprint that the Scourge was modeled after, including the Lich King's own forces, right? Everything we encounter there is vaguely humanoid, no matter what it was in its previous life. And one of the first things you do, even if you're not in Maldraxxus as your faction...
Not entirely. There's the spider people.
That's true. Still humanoid.
And what does the Scourge go out of its way to conquer first?
Spider
in
people.
The War of the Spider? Yeah.
Yeah.
They make their own version of the spider people that you meet in Maldraxxus. The Scourge makes its own version.
Yeah, the House of Eyes.
That's interesting.
But like the base rank and file troop, and this is one of the first quests you do when you're just going through before you pick your actual covenant, is you're going through like the carnal pits and arming humanoid, vaguely human-shaped skeletons or zombies or skeletons with flesh trauma, whatever they are, to get up out of the muck, go grab a sword, and get back to fighting. And very few of the folks that are in Maldraxxus seem to keep their original form. There are obvious exceptions like Morgraine and why can't I think of her name now? The Naga, Lady Vraka, but also Lady Vash. Thank you.
Draka, not Vraka.
Yeah, Draka, Vash. Very few of them keep their original form. Most of them go into a bipedal human form unless they go to the House of Eyes or have a specific thing that they're built for.
Actually, when he's talking to Vash, Mograine points out that when Vash arrived, she looked like a night elf.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
That's
right.
That she chose to basically transform back into Vash. That's what she felt she truly was. But she showed up. She was a night elf.
That's fair. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. So
I mean, one assumes that when they get there, I think based on my admittedly limited understanding of Maldraxxus, when you get there, you're you. You're what you were in life. But you can choose what to become. And a lot of the ones that turn into those big, like Baron Virax or whatever his name was, he chose that form. That was what he chose to become. So that's interesting in of itself. The Scourge didn't get that choice. The Scourge are very clearly not asked what they should look like. But it is still an interesting connection between the two of them. But to get back to the idea of like having various undead on Azeroth, I do think there are other races afflicted by the Scourge, or by undeath in general, we should say. We know, like I said, we know there are some elves. We know there are undead dwarves and undead tauren. I know there's undead trolls. We've definitely seen those.
Technically, we know there's all the other races as well because Death Knights exist, but...
Yeah, so it would actually... I think there might be... I don't know about... To answer the other question, though, about Dark Rangers as another class, like DKs or Demon Hunters, I don't know. Honestly, though, the thing is that Dark Rangers seem very specific to Forsaken for me, whereas then there's like the Shadow Hunters from the Trolls, and Night Elves have a bunch of candidates for what they would be, like Sentinels or possibly even Wardens, although that might be a rogue thing. But I think it's almost like you wouldn't really have like a class for it, just because there would be so many different variations.
The only thing that I keep coming back to on that one is I can already hear some of my guildies saying yes at this, but as much as I like survival as a melee spec for hunters in general, and I think it's a lot of fun, it is a spec that hasn't been touched in a long time or balanced or really given any sort of attention or love. If they really, really, really wanted to give Dark Rangers a presence after this, Dark Rangers sort of embody that whole survival aspect of being a hunter, in working with the pet, in working in long stints alone, going on deep missions in the middle of nowhere and having to be completely self-sufficient. If they really wanted to bring something like that into the players, they could reflavor survival as a hunter spec to be more like that. Bring it maybe more back to its roots. If people are really so unhappy with survival as a lot of people seem to think they are, and give it sort of that flair. And I think that could be something very interesting, and could also be a decent aftermath for everything that happens here. Because with Sylvanas gone from whatever position of power she held in the Forsaken, not all of the Dark Rangers, I think, skipped out with her. That would seem weird, or that they would all be like insanely loyal only to her. And I think some of them probably would have been also upset, because we know that during the process of the Valkyr raising Forsaken under Sylvanas' banner, they were offered choices. If you do the Darkshore stuff, you do the Darkshore Warfront, it's choices being offered. And it's one of those weird things with, if you're playing Horde, that you get to experience. It's you take the Valkyr around with you, the Valkyr goes to the slain and says, do you want another chance at life? Do you want to, be resurrected and serve the Dark Lady? And some of them say yes, and they get up and they join the fight. And some of them say no and turn into angry wisps and blow up or fight you. And so there's an element of that there as well. So if you're offered that choice and you think you're getting revenge, or you think you're getting whatever, and you're not anymore, and what you're promised isn't there anymore, I can see some of those Dark Rangers hanging back. But I could also see them teaching. And like on the Alliance side, you have Void Elves. You have folks that literally tap directly into the primal nature of Shadow itself. And at this point, like, of course, and the leader of that is at one point a ranger. You could very clearly justify having a spec of hunters on both factions based purely on that allow you to be a Dark Ranger if you really choose to. Harnessing the power of Shadow just like a priest does, just like a Void Elf does. Coming back from the Forsaken, offer and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't what I signed up for. I'm going to teach others how to survive and, be self-sufficient and teach them the tricks so that we can actually be a Ranger force again. Like, I could see that happening. And I think that would actually be kind of cool. And as much as I like survival as a melee spec, I'd be willing to give it up for something like that because I think it would be flavorful and I think it would be interesting and it would be an interesting aftermath of everything that's happening now. So they could do it. I don't see them adding another class anytime in the near future. And we talk about this on the regular show quite a bit. It's one of those things where you're looking at 36 specs, 12 classes, something like, I think that's the breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
That's
one class only has 2 specs and one class has 4.
Yeah, that's a lot. So, I mean, maybe pulling one spec out and realigning it to suit something like this, I think that would be way more viable.
I got to be honest with you, man. I do not see the Alliance getting Dark Rangers, and I do not see Dark Rangers as particularly Shadow. I think they are death.
Okay.
They are undead, and their Dark Ranger abilities are all rooted around that. Like when Sylvanas turns into a Banshee to attack people and then comes back to being corporeal again. I think that's what the Dark Rangers that she brought up do. If you wanted Shadow Hunters in the Horde, that's what Vol'jin's guys do. That's what Vol'jin did. Vol'jin was a Shadow Hunter. I'm not buying it for the Alliance. I think you could actually have a straight up Shadow Ranger because with the Void Elves, but they're not Dark Rangers.
Oh, yeah.
And I also think at the same time, though, you've also got the Alliance has very different hunter traditions. And it's like you've got the classic Night Elf one, then you've got the Dwarf one, which is extremely mechanical. They just brought in gnomes. I honestly feel like there's all these different kinds of hunter. And the hunter class doesn't do a good job of representing all that variety within their ranks.
I don't know that it can, though.
I don't know if it can either, but just porting over the Forsaken flavor and saying everybody should have it, I don't see that doesn't work for me. It just feels like, okay, now we all get to be a little Forsaken. I don't know. I honestly almost think it would be better to have Dark Rangers as a Horde only class than to make it something the Alliance does. It doesn't feel like something the Alliance does, at least the way things are now. But we were talking before about groups that, don't care about the Alliance Horde dichotomy, so maybe we should get some more of that going on. I don't know. This is just my reaction to it. I feel like there's too many other things, other kinds of hunter, and I don't know, we've talked about it before. I do think there's ways to do it without changing. You could do it without changing survival at all if you just did the cosmetic thing. You could have various abilities that you could flavor in different ways based on, okay, now all my stuff is Dark Ranger flavored. Like, well, all my stuff is, Horde, Dwarf Rifleman flavored. I just feel like there's ways to do it that wouldn't be just porting this very, very specifically Forsaken thing to be everybody.
Very, very valid point. I accept your view on that.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's my take on it.
I think you make good points. But hopefully that answers your question. We are going to go ahead and move on to our next one here. Hello, Watchers. I've recently replayed through the Maldraxxus campaign on one of my new alts. One of my favorite quests in WoW is the All I Will Ever Be questline, where Alexandros Morgraine and you get closure on why he was sent to Maldraxxus instead of Bastion. Morgraine comes to the conclusion that he is glad he went to Maldraxxus, in part due to his memory of his loved ones fueling his strength, and that he will restore honor to Maldraxxus. But once you complete the entire storyline of 9.1, you find out that Bastion is going to allow people sent there to choose between giving up their memories or keeping them. So back to Morgraine's original question that sent him on his memory walk in Bastion. Should he have been sent to Bastion? Wouldn't that be a better fit for him than Maldraxxus, especially given the new rule changes? Thanks in advance, Evil Cowid, Goblin Warlock from Bleeding Hollow. You kind of specify, and I think you answer your own question a little bit here. It wasn't until recently that Bastion has decided maybe stripping memories from our people is a bad idea. Maybe we should let them choose. So had he had gone there originally, he would have had his memories stripped. And so it's not like they're giving those memories back to people. They haven't said that they're going to go through the archives and just open the vaults and give everything back to everybody, especially because a lot of those folks have reforged lives, right? They have entirely new personalities. They have entirely new bonds. They have entirely new everything about them. And we don't know how long ago that was. And so we talk about this with like the whole Forsaken thing a long time ago as well. If you're the sum of your memories and all of your memories have been stripped and you're forced to rebuild from that point on, are you the same person? And it's sort of like the Ship of Theseus thing, right? You've replaced everything. Can you possibly be the same person? You know, and there's a lot of complicated stuff with Pelagos, and I'm going to shut up and let Matt talk about Bastion here in a minute. But like, would Pelagos, you know, had they gotten through and had their memories stripped and then been, you know, an eon goes by and then they get the offer to have all their memories back, is it the same person? Do they remember who they are? Is that even remotely okay? So I think it played out the way it needed to, because Morgraine is stronger because of his memories, because of who he was fighting for, and going to Maldraxxus at the time made the most sense because Maldraxxus wanted that, and Bastion had not made the change yet. We are the cause of that change happening. So I'll let Matt give his 2 cents on here.
I agree with you. Sorry, I can't always be argumentative. I mean, you've pretty much said everything I was thinking.
Yeah.
You know, we don't even know, like, they've stopped doing it now, but that doesn't mean they can just give everyone back their memories. Like, I don't know how that's going to work. I know that that memories get saved, so maybe it's possible, but very clearly the system that they're using to save stuff isn't perfect. Like, there's lots of problems here. I don't think that if he'd gone to Maldraxxus at the time, they would have taken his memories away from him. And if he decided now, well, I want to go over to Bastion now. I mean, he did go to Maldraxxus. I'm sorry, that was my misstatement. But if he decided, well, I want to go to Bastion now, I mean, he's been in Maldraxxus for an indeterminate amount of time.
Yeah.
You know, because time doesn't work the same way there. He's experienced, for all we know, tens of thousands of years of life, unlife, whatever, there. That's where he has been. That's where he has been fighting. It's shaped who he has become. I don't necessarily think that he'd want to go to Bastion. He is in Maldraxxus. It's the place that he was chosen to go to. It's the place he's been this whole time. I'm not saying he wouldn't go to Bastion or couldn't. I just don't know that he'd want to. The people of Bastion aren't warriors first and foremost. They can fight, and they do fight, but they're not. Their purpose is not the defense of, you know, the Shadowlands. They're not the warriors. They're guardians and shepherds, and that's certainly important. Is it Morgraine? Is Morgraine a guardian and a shepherd first? I don't think he is. I think he fought to protect his people, but his life has been shaped and divided by that war. There's clear demarcations of who he was before and who he was after. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's things he's done, and then since he went to Maldraxxus, there's other things he's done. He just seems to fit there better. That would be my statement. I don't think even now, yes, now in Bastion, he wouldn't have to lose his memories, but that doesn't mean he'd fit in there. Because the first thing he'd be trying to do, even in Maldraxxus, he rose to a leadership position. He'd be trying to lead, and he'd be trying to lead as a soldier. And that's not how Bastion works. I mean, I think he is needed in Maldraxxus, and, you know, Maldraxxus needs him it needs him to be Morgraine in Maldraxxus, somebody who will say no. No, winning isn't everything. You do actually have to have honor. You have to do the right thing. That's what both Morgraine and Maldraxxus need. So I don't see him making that jump.
Yeah, and hopefully that answers your question. I don't think anything that's happened now changes anything that would happen in the past, is really what our next question comes from Stouty Poofs. Question for Lore Watch. Looking at Wowpedia, I came across an unused model of Argus, and it looks eerily like the Jailer. I was wondering if you foresee a tie-in to Mr. Unmaker. Maybe some reveal when Zoval possibly transforms once he gets the sigil back, which we've already seen, but it's a bit of an older question, I apologize. Or was this just a redo of ideas like using Zoval's original look for the Primus? And second, since the Army of Light and the Burning Crusade both ultimately had a shared enemy in the Void, do you think the Dreadlords are responsible for getting the two to spend 1,000 years or more beating on each other instead of focusing on a shared cause? Could those dastardly Dreadlords be duping everyone on another level past the Jailer? My brain hurts. Thanks for all you do. I think we'll start with the second one first. It's entirely possible because even at the end of the day, even with all the reveals of the Dreadlords in the current expansion and the storyline, like, yeah, they're definitely working for Daenathrius, but we also don't know to what end. And I'm starting to think that maybe Daenathrius had other plans that were not exactly aligned with the Jailer, or maybe he's the one that put the bug in the Jailer's ear in the first place, right? Like, we got to this whole reveal where, you know, at one point Zoval got tired of the tedium of this and wanted to remake everything and then make everything serve him. And it's like, where did he get that idea from? Why did that idea occur to him? What popped up that made him do that when everybody else seems to be content in their roles? What made him different? Or was it Daenathrius going to his brother and saying, hey, you know what? You should be in charge of all this. This is unfair. Like, look at you. You're the biggest of us. You've got the most responsibility. You send everybody where they need to go. Did Daenathrius get corrupted in the first place? We know that the Void is capable of breaching into the Shadowlands. We see, and Matt points this out before, you know, Bastion under siege by the Void. Why was it only there? Is that part of the reason why the Light decided that it really wanted to take war to Revendreth? Were they doing something that the Light had seen and didn't like? Like, I don't know, cottoning with Void entities? That seems like something that would definitely get their jimmies in a rustle, right? So we don't know a whole lot of that yet. All we know is that Zoval's looking to remake the universe essentially to suit his whims, and we don't know how he got there. It could be at the behest of Daenathrius, and this could be part of his long game with the Dreadlords. But I think there is some possible truth to the idea of getting the two factions to fight each other long enough to keep like everything else occupied while the bigger plan goes on. No idea. What do you think, man?
I mean, I don't think it's just the Light and the Crusade. I think they've been trying to get everybody to fight everybody. Whether or not that's for Daenathrius, whether or not that's for something even beyond Daenathrius, or if Daenathrius is working for somebody else as he switched paymasters, we don't know. I mean, it is true that Daenathrius reminds me of Kael'thas a lot.
A lot. Yeah,
the two of them are very similar. It's actually one of those things where I find myself wondering, is there another reason that Daenathrius had Kael'thas, had Kael'thas there? Like, did it amuse him? Or did it remind him of something? I don't know. But it is possible that Daenathrius was working for the Jailer when he decided to send the Dreadlords out to monkey with everybody's business. But there definitely does seem to be a lot of business being monkeyed with. And it does seem to be like literally every cosmic faction that they could get into. I mean, the only one that they felt like they weren't sure if they could manipulate was the Void. Because the Void, since they can kind of see all these different possible futures, they could be fully aware of what you're trying to do. I mean, and that's an interesting wrinkle in the whole plan. So it might be that they think they know what they're doing, but the Void is fully aware of what they're doing and is using it to their advantage. It might not even be that the Dreadlords are actually the ones ultimately in control here. Like they themselves worried, it could be that the Void simply took advantage of a situation that they're not sane enough to engineer, but they're prescient enough to piggyback on, if that makes sense. The Void lacks a lot of cold, hard, rational deception because they never bother to lie to you. They just tell you so many different truths you go mad. But they could use somebody else's deception effectively. That's one thing to keep in mind. I honestly, we don't know, but it's interesting to think.
Yeah, and I think there's more to it, and I think we will we'll find out more, obviously, as things go on. I think more is going to be revealed. But now let's go to the first question back, which is this whole idea that there might be some tie between Zoval and Argus. This is something that gets brought up a lot. I don't know about you, Matt, but I know I get at least one message about this every week or so.
No, and I usually ask questions about pumpkins.
That's fair. Pumpkins are much better.
Or dinosaurs.
During the course of this recording, a pumpkin spice latte did show up in my hand.
Is it dinosaur flavor?
It is not dinosaur flavored. Well, I don't know if it's dinosaur flavored, but regardless, there's a certain aspect of the game that I think some of the assets might have been maybe reused for some of the storytelling, but I don't know if there's a direct link between Argus and Zoval. I don't know if there ever was or if there ever will be. And the reason I say that is because
there is one thing I can think of, just that it does seem to be the case that the Titans and the Eternal Ones have a connection of some sort.
Right.
But that's it. That's all I got.
And especially because we know, at least in terms of our universe and the Shadowlands was already set up before we ever took any fight to Argus. This happened well before that, and we know that for a fact just based off of timing, talking about Daenathrius, talking about the Dreadlords, and their interactions with everything, right? So the Legion happened in part because of the Dreadlords.
It is interesting to go back to your thing then. Since we know the Dreadlords were doing stuff like watching worlds as they got void corrupted.
Uh-huh.
And they were aware of like world souls and how that all worked.
And wanting to know more about it.
They might have actually been trying to steer the evolution of Titans in a direction that was useful to them.
Which would also lead to the whole torturing of Argus and using it as an engine, with their arcane secrets and whatever they revealed. But also at the same time, why they're so keenly interested in Azeroth. Maybe not necessarily because of Azeroth being the strongest Titan, which, people say that, but again, she's still in an egg. But what if it's because they've experimented so many times already with infecting planets with void, and it's failed every single time? That's part of scientific experimentation, is doing things, noting the failures, and adjusting your process to try to get a success. What if they're just ready for the next attempt? What if that's the whole purpose, or what they're trying to do? Like you said, like going back to them looking at the void and looking at those planets.
Another thing to point out, Sargeras had multiple demons ready to torture the world souls of the Titans.
Yep.
Until they broke and served him.
Like Agamar.
And there's a Nathrazim chained up in the basement. being tortured by the same process. And clearly they don't trust him anymore.
Yeah.
And you'll notice, there aren't any, I can't think of any Dreadlord bosses in Taurus. Can you? There might be one. Yeah, I meant aside from him.
Yeah, but I was going to bring that up too. Like they're suspiciously absent. Like you see in Legion, you encounter the one in Azuna, and that's it.
No, you fight one atop the Cathedral of Eternal Darkness.
Oh, that's right, the top of the cathedral. But even then,
it's actually the one that Illidan fought, Tichondrius.
Yeah, but now we know how many there are. Mm-hmm. Where were they? What were they?
I think there are a few others that I think Balnazar shows up and so forth. But I do think that it's interesting that in Taurus there aren't any.
They're not there defending him.
Yeah, did they pull out, or did he banish them? Did he tell them go somewhere else and start, you have the trait of Varimathras, we could, and he's like, go somewhere else now.
Or was that part of the plan? Because Sargeras was the last Titan in a position of power enough to still cleave a planet in twain if he so choose. And yet, and we know that he did do that. So maybe that was on purpose. Maybe they left him to fend for himself because they wanted us to get him locked away at the seat of the Pantheon, where none of the Titans can interact with us anymore because they're all locked away in that little prison state. What if that was their chess game, just to get the Titans out of the picture? And instead of it having anything to do specifically with Argus being tied to Zoval, it was getting Argus taken care of, because a rampaging world soul born into a Titan that is absolutely mad after eons of being tortured and uses a power source for an engine of torture and is very clearly in pain and not in their right mind through the universe. Because up to this point, the only other Titan that had been, reborn was Agamar, who was wholly broken and loyal to Sargeras. How much damage would the Unmaker do in the universe just going absolutely haywire?
That assumes that they wouldn't want that.
Maybe they don't.
Maybe they don't, but it'd be interesting if Sargeras was starting to suspect them.
Mm-hmm. He's not
and
dumb.
That's why he had Varimathras down in the basement, where he could be tortured by the same people that broke Agamar. Sargeras knew that killing them didn't work, because he'd done it before. So it is interesting to me to think about what might have been going on there if Sargeras was starting to understand that he was being manipulated.
Yeah.
That doesn't change the fact that they might have very fact bailed at the right moment, because they're really good at bailing at the right moment.
Yeah, they are.
You know, they might have been like, okay, and now we're not going to be around, you know, because either way, you know, you don't see them in Antorus that I can think of. There's just not that many present.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that is interesting to think about. It doesn't really answer the question, but we don't really know. I mean, obviously, I don't think that the Argus model was supposed to look like the Jailer. I think they were just working on Jailer concepts.
I think so, too.
But it is entirely... One of the interesting things is one of the shadows of the Jailer that they had back in BlizzCon, one of the silhouettes, doesn't look anything like the Jailer as we first encountered him. Does look like the Jailer after he gets the Arbiter part back.
Yes.
And so I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm going to double down on it, I think that the only relation between Zoval and the Unmaker is the Titan connection, as was pointed out by Matt, and maybe as a chess piece, and that's it. And I think that everything that the interactions between the two, I don't think that Argus is Zoval in any way, shape, or form. I don't think that is entire. I think the story has flat out proven at this point that is not possible. But I think there may have been knowledge of it, and I think that Zoval is smart enough, and if not Zoval, the Daenathrius and the Dreadlords, to position all of those pieces in a very specific way to keep things going. And it's one of the things I do like is looking back on this and now starting to second guess all of the choices that we made. I often make a joke about we are the best and worst thing that ever happened to Azeroth, because we just move from horrific event to horrific event, and we're very reactionary and never clean things up. And now I'm starting to wonder if that's not entirely our choice, and if maybe that's all been orchestrated from the very, very beginning to keep us essentially, busy. Because if we had any time to sit down and actually think about things, maybe we wouldn't make these choices. So you just throw everything you can at all of the heroes and all the power base to keep them occupied, and then get them to remove the pieces from the board that you don't want to deal with anymore, or the obstacles that you have in your way, you get them to remove for you. It's very Xanatos, and I'm kind of here for it. So, but I think that's going to do it, unless there's anything else you want to add.
The world's pumpkin production, 50% of it annually comes from either India or China. I wanted to add that.
I appreciate that. Thank you all. This has been Pumpkin Watch. But Blizzard Watch is made possible due to generous contributions at patreon.com/Blizzard Watch. Your continued support means this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast or the queue, and an ads-free site experience. Again, if you do have questions for this podcast or the other podcast, be sure to send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com or one of our several Patreon channels. Specify which podcast it is for. And as a reminder, all of us at Blizzard Watch stand with the employees of Activision Blizzard in demanding change for a better tomorrow and a safe work environment.